You've been told a comforting lie, a neat, simple little fairy tale about the 1920s. You know the one, the roaring 20s. Jazz, flappers, endless parties, and a stock market that only went up. A time of boundless optimism, cut short by a sudden, tragic, and entirely unpredictable accident called the Great Crash of 1929. It's a comfortable story. It makes it seem like a force of nature, an act of God. A tragedy, yes, but a random one. That story is a carefully packaged illusion, one of the most dangerous and persistent lies in modern history, because the darkest truths are the ones quietly hidden in plain sight. The truth is, the Great Depression wasn't an accident. It wasn't unpredictable. For a very small group of people, it wasn't even a tragedy. It was an opportunity. It was the single greatest transfer of wealth in American history, a financial coup d'etat conducted in broad daylight. The ticking time bomb wasn't placed by fate. It was built, piece by piece, by the very people who claimed to be guardians of the system. The people who knew exactly when to walk away just before it exploded, and the financial architecture they used to pull it off. It's the same architecture that surrounds your money, your savings, your future right now. The rules of the game haven't changed, only the names of the players. So, the question we have to ask isn't how the market crashed. The real question is, was it a crash or was it a push? To understand the crash, you can't start in 1929. That's like showing up for the last 10 minutes of a movie and trying to guess the plot. No, you have to go back to 1913, the year the real machine of power was assembled. The Federal Reserve. They told the public it was a mechanism for stability, a way to prevent bank runs and panics, to manage the nation's money supply for the good of all. This is the surface narrative, the illusion. The reality is that a small group of powerful bankers, the same ones who had nearly wrecked the country multiple times, convinced the government to give them a legal monopoly over the creation of money. Think about that. They were given the power to create money out of thin air, lend it out, and charge interest on it. It was the ultimate power. The power to create booms and busts at will. For the first few years, the machine was warming up. Then came World War I, and war needs money, oceans of it. The Fed, working with the Treasury, cranked the handle on the printing press. They monetized debt, which is a polite way of saying they printed money to loan to the government so it could buy bombs and bullets. This flooded the country with new currency. It was our first real taste of the cycle: war, debt, and inflation. The playbook never changes. After the war ended, there was a brief, sharp recession in 1920. The machine was powered down. But then, the real game began. The man at the controls was Benjamin Strong, the governor of the New York Federal Reserve. Strong was, for all intents and purposes, the dictator of American finance. And in the early 1920s, he had a problem. Great Britain, the old financial empire, was struggling. Their currency, the pound, was weak. They wanted to return to the gold standard at their pre-war value, but their economy was a wreck. Strong, a deep Anglophile with connections to the most powerful bankers in London, decided to help. And how did he help? He deliberately created an ocean of cheap, easy money in the United States. He lowered interest rates. He bought government bonds on the open market, injecting cash directly into the banking system. The idea was to make it more attractive for money to flow from America to London. It was a favor to the old guard. But what it did at home was light, the fuse on the greatest speculative bonfire in history. He poured gasoline on the American economy to help a friend put out a fire in their backyard. This wasn't for you. It wasn't for the American farmer or the factory worker. It was an inside deal between the world's financial elite. This easy money had to go somewhere. The banks, flush with cash they could borrow from the Fed for next to nothing, needed to lend it out, and they found the perfect place: Wall Street. They started lending money to literally anyone to buy stocks. This was the magic of buying on margin. You only needed to put down 10% of the stock's price. The broker, funded by the big bank, would loan you the other 90%. It was a financial pyramid scheme sanctioned by the highest authorities. Think about it. If you have $1,000, you can buy $10,000 worth of stock. If that stock goes up by just 10%, you've doubled your money. Your $1,000 is now $2,000. It felt like a flawless, can't-lose system. And as more and more people rushed in, fueled by this borrowed money, the market soared. The Roaring Twenties had begun. But it wasn't built on innovation or production or savings. It was a phantom boom, built on a mountain of debt. It was hollow at its core. Everyone from the shoeshine boy to the industrial titan was playing the market. And the media, the politicians, the so-called experts, they were the cheerleaders. President Coolidge famously said the business of America was business. Economist Irving Fisher declared that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau. It was a new era, they said. The old rules of boom and bust were dead. The Federal Reserve had tamed the business cycle. Do you see the pattern? Every bubble has its chorus of high priests insisting this time is different. But behind the scenes, the smart money was getting nervous. They knew the truth. They knew that any boom built on cheap credit must inevitably end when the credit is withdrawn. History rhymes. The playbook is clear. You can't print your way to real prosperity. And here is where the story takes a darker turn. While the public was being told to borrow and speculate, a very different game was being played in the private boardrooms of New York. This was the era of the investment pools. These were secret consortiums of elite financiers, men from JP Morgan, Chase, National City Bank. They would pool their capital to manipulate the price of a specific stock. They'd begin buying up shares, creating a flurry of activity that would get noticed on the ticker tape. This is called painting the tape. It creates the illusion of high demand. Then, the friendly press would start publishing glowing articles about the company's prospects. The company's leaders, often in on the scheme, would release rosy forecasts. Suddenly, the public, seeing the stock rising and reading the good news, would pile in, desperate not to miss out. The FOMO was a weapon. As the public's buying frenzy pushed the price into the stratosphere, the pool operators, the insiders, would quietly begin to sell their shares to the suckers who were just arriving. They would distribute their holdings at the peak, leaving the public holding the bag when the inevitable collapse came. It was a perfectly legal, highly coordinated fleecing of the American public, and it happened over and over again. By 1928 and early 1929, the most astute players knew the party was ending. The Fed, under pressure from a few who saw the danger, began to gently tap the brakes. They raised the discount rate, the rate at which banks borrow from the Fed. It went from 3.5% to 5%. It was a signal, a warning shot fired for those who knew how to listen. The flow of cheap money was about to be turned off. This is the moment of truth. This is where you separate the insiders from the crowd. Joseph P. Kennedy, a notorious speculator and father of a future president, famously decided to sell all his stocks after a shoeshine boy started giving him stock tips. He reasoned that when the shoeshine boys have tips, the market is too popular for its own good. It's a cute story, but the reality is more calculated. Kennedy was running manipulative pools himself. He knew exactly how the game was played. He saw the credit tightening, and he got out. Bernard Baruch, another legendary financier and advisor to presidents, did the same. He liquidated his holdings and sat on cash. Charles Mitchell of National City Bank, one of the biggest cheerleaders for the bull market, privately told his top men to start preparing for a crash. The Rockefellers quietly built up huge cash reserves. They knew the music was about to stop. The game of musical chairs was ending, and they had already secured their seats, leaving everyone else to scramble. They had spent years building the bonfire, and now they were selling tickets to watch it burn from a safe distance. In August of 1929, the Fed made its move. It raised the discount rate again to 6%. This was the kill shot. It made borrowing money to speculate prohibitively expensive. It choked off the flow of credit that had inflated the bubble. The insiders had already positioned themselves. Now they just had to wait. The market sputtered for a few weeks. The public, conditioned for years to buy the dip, saw it as another opportunity. They were wrong. The smart money wasn't buying. They were done. They were out. On October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, the selling started in earnest. Panic set in. The problem with buying on margin, the fatal flaw that was always there, was now exposed. When the value of your stocks falls, your broker issues a margin call. He demands you put up more cash to cover the loan. But nobody had any cash. They had plowed it all into the market, so they were forced to sell their stocks to cover the margin call, which pushed prices down further, which triggered more margin calls, which triggered more selling. It was a death spiral, a cascade of forced liquidation. The financial pyramid was collapsing under its own weight. The titans of Wall Street, men like Richard Whitney of the Morgan Bank, made a great show of publicly buying stocks to restore confidence. It was a classic move, a bear trap. It caused a small rally, luring in the last of the hopefuls before the final brutal plunge on Black Tuesday, October 29th. The floor gave out completely. Fortunes built over a decade were wiped out in a matter of hours. The savings of millions of ordinary people vanished into thin air. But the story gets darker. The money didn't just vanish. For every seller in a panic, there has to be a buyer. Who was buying? Who had the cash, the liquidity to pick up the pieces? The very same people who had gotten out at the top. While the public was being wiped out, the financial elite who had sat on the sidelines with their cash reserves began to step in, not as saviors, but as predators. They weren't buying at the top. They were buying at the bottom after the crash had wiped the slate clean. They were buying America's greatest corporations, its infrastructure, its real estate, for 10 cents on the dollar. The crash was a tragedy for the masses, but it was the fire sale of a lifetime for the financial oligarchy. It cemented their power for generations. The Great Depression that followed ensured that anyone who had been a competitor was either absorbed or destroyed. Small banks failed by the thousands, and their assets were swallowed by the big banks. Farms were foreclosed upon and bought up by insurance companies and financial syndicates. It was a ruthless consolidation of economic power. And where was the Federal Reserve? The institution created to prevent panics. It did the exact opposite of what was needed. Instead of providing liquidity to the banking system to stop the panic, it tightened the money supply even further. It stood by and watched as thousands of banks failed, taking the life savings of millions with them. Was this epic incompetence, or was it the deliberate final act of the plan, wiping the system clean so it could be rebuilt from the ground up, under the complete control of the very bankers who had orchestrated the whole cycle? History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. So, you see the pattern now. A central bank with the power to print money creates a flood of cheap credit. This easy money inflates a speculative bubble in an asset class. Stocks, real estate, crypto, it doesn't matter. The media and the establishment cheer it on, promising a new era of permanent prosperity. The public, driven by greed and the fear of missing out, borrows heavily to get in on the action. Then, quietly, the insiders, the people who understand how the game is played, start to sell. They sell their assets to the public at the peak. The central bank then tightens the credit, popping the bubble it created. The crash wipes out the public, who are forced to sell their assets in a panic at the bottom. And who is there to buy them? The insiders, who are now flush with cash. It is the greatest, most brutal, and most effective wealth transfer mechanism ever invented. Does any of this sound familiar? Think of the dot-com bust in 2000. Think of the housing crisis in 2008. In 2008, the Federal Reserve flooded the system with cheap money to save it. Where did that money go? It inflated a new bubble, the everything bubble. For a decade, we had 0% interest rates, free money. And what happened? Stocks soared, real estate soared. Ordinary people, their savings accounts earning nothing, were forced to gamble in the market to try and get ahead. And now? Now the Fed is tightening credit at the fastest pace in history. They are raising interest rates, pulling that liquidity out of the system. We are at the precipice of the same cycle. The playbook never changes. You are living through the same script that played out in 1929. The names are different, the technology is different, but the mechanics are identical. The illusion is that the system is there to help you. The reality is that it is a mechanism of control, designed to transfer wealth from the many to the few. So was the 1929 crash an inside job. If by that you mean a handful of men in a smoke-filled room plotting a specific date on a calendar, then probably not. That's a cartoonish fantasy. The reality is far more subtle and far more damning. It was a systemic inside job. It was the result of a financial elite empowered by their own private central bank, acting in their own rational self-interest, with full knowledge of the cycle they were creating, and positioning themselves to profit from the wreckage they knew was coming. They didn't need a secret conspiracy. The rules of the game they themselves had written guaranteed the outcome. The final, brutal irony, the Great Depression, the crisis they engineered, led to a massive expansion of government power under FDR. And who do you think wrote the new rules? The same financial interests. The Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial and investment banking, was a temporary cage, but the power of the Fed was enhanced. The system became even more centralized. It was a masterclass in problem reaction solution. Create the crisis. Wait for the public to demand action, then offer the solution that gives you even more power. This is the essential lesson. This is the truth that has been buried under a century of propaganda. History is a weapon. If you don't understand how it has been used against others in the past, you are doomed to have it used against you now. Don't be a pawn in their game. The system may be rigged, but you don't have to be a willing victim. Knowledge is your armor. Understanding this cycle of boom and bust, of credit creation and destruction, is the first step toward financial sovereignty. Stop listening to the cheerleaders on TV telling you this time is different. Stop chasing hot tips. Start watching the source. Watch the central banks. Watch the flow of credit. History shows us with brutal clarity that they will tell you when the party is starting, but they will never, ever call you to tell you when it's over. You have to be smart enough to leave on your own. You have to recognize the pattern. Because the game is rigged, the deck is stacked. But if you know the rules, you can at least refuse to play.